In addition, I'd like to thank the previous speakers, the previous panel. Dennis Schranz, I hope you enjoyed and found his comments informative. I certainly did. The Speaker of the House, I want to thank him for coming down here and sharing his thoughts today. In the panel, I would like to thank the members there because, you know, it certainly isn't easy to throw your dirty laundry out there, and I don't think any one of us would feel willing and welcome to do that at any point in time, and they do it. And Jackie Karen has received a pardon. She doesn't have to go tell anybody that she's a formerly incarcerated individual, but she does because she cares about the process, and she cares about helping other people. So I definitely want to give them thanks, and probably another round of applause if we could, because I really appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to go along with the abridged version of our next presentation. Joe Grealish is from Court Support Enforcement. Support Enforcement, not Court Support. There's a lot of acronyms and names here. I'm still learning. And we met Support Enforcement about a year ago this month. And what they had been doing is, well, I'll let him explain what they're doing. This is a bridge. So his bio is in your panel packets as well. So without further ado, I just want to say what this is, though, is I think an example of the system recognizing that maybe what it was doing in the past wasn't working, and there's a better way of doing things that hopefully will be a win-win for everybody. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do with all the things that we do and are bringing to light today. So without further ado, here's Joe.
I want to first thank Andrew for inviting us even to sit at the table, because in the past I think that some of our work hasn't been connected to some of your work. And although we've met with many of you over the years, we really haven't sat down and discussed the issues that we're going to discuss today until recently. I'm just going to throw up our mission statement up here. We're actually part of the judicial branch, and our mission is to assist parents in securing financial and medical support for their children by providing quality services and information to the court, our customers, the community, in a courteous, efficient, and effective manner that is sensitive to the contributions both parents make to their children's development. A mouthful. In short, we collect child support, and we try to make sure there's an appropriate order. We're actually part of the judicial branch. We're in the court operations division. We often get confused with Mr. Carbone's group, which is CSSD and Family Services. CSSD's primary responsibilities. Can everyone hear me, by the way? No. If I said here? Yes. Is CSSD primarily deals with custody and visitation related issues. We deal with the child support related issues. We're a cooperative agency in that we provide certain actions on behalf of the Department of Social Services and our other partners, which is the Attorney General's office. And you can see the type of activities that we complete. We issued about 50,000 income withholding orders, which is in effect an attachment of a person's wages to satisfy a child support debt. We conduct approximately 7,000 modification reviews a year. They don't all go to court. Some of them result in a finding that there is no change in circumstances. We initiate about 15,000 contempt actions a year. And primarily, when we take a contempt action to court, we have to show that the person had the ability to pay it, which will be a question further in this presentation. The ability, the willful knowledge that they had the order, and the fact that they chose not to pay the order. And we operate actually under civil family law as opposed to criminal law. And I think that that's a confusion, because a person can be incarcerated under a contempt action, that people often confuse us with the criminal system. We are not a criminal agency. We're actually under civil family. And everyone's saying, why is child support here today? And coming in here, I was thinking the same thing. I actually made a modification to the presentation as I was sitting here, because you learn stuff as you go along. we came into this process, we didn't know much about some of the issues that were raised here and with some of the community groups that we've met with. We met with Male Involvement Network, and I know that there are some people here. We met with Career Resources. And the groups are giving us insights that we haven't had before. And I think that events like this, Building Bridges, brings together the parties as evidenced by bringing us in. We were an afterthought, I think, in a lot of circumstances, but what we do impacts families, impacts the former inmate. And children, our primary responsibility is to get money to children. It doesn't do us any good to get money or attempt to get money if the process stops, if the person goes back to jail. That makes it impossible for us to collect the money. Our actions that we've come to actually notice that our actions can actually contribute to or inhibit a person's successful reentry. And what I mean by that is we have the option to take an individual to court or not. That's in our mandate. There are some actions that are federally mandated that the Connecticut legislature has adopted and that we're required to do. However, the contempt action is something that we have the discretion to do. And in our discussions in the past, we have been very aggressive with contempt actions. If someone comes out of court, our immediate first thought was to get money from that person, when in reality, we could be inhibiting that person's reentry into society. And I think that the people in this group, we have common interests. It's in our interest, it's in our society's interest to have people back in the workforce. And it does benefit families. There is that trickle-down effect that if the former inmate gets a job and holds that job and we're able to attach the wages, somewhere down the road, that child might not have to go on public assistance. And as you'll see further in this presentation, is that people that go to prison are twice as more likely to have a child on public assistance. So 2 times more likely. Is that coincidence? Probably not. When we started this process, it was a selfish interest. Our collection rate in Connecticut is 55%. That means for every dollar that's due, we collect 55 cents. And I don't know, if someone told me that I was going to get 55 cents out of a dollar on my paycheck, I wouldn't be too happy. And I think that, you know, if you ask the families on the other side of the coin, the custodial parent and the families that are the 45% that are getting nothing, that you would see how important the actions of the people in this room can be. We couldn't do a lot of the stuff that we have here and some of the connections that we made in this presentation without the help of the Department of Corrections. And I think that, you know, sometimes tragedy leads to a more openness in society too, where we're able to share the information and find the connections that we couldn't see before. One of those studies, we found that there were a large number of presently incarcerated non-custodial parents who had a civil arrest warrant. And it sounds strange, but what happened is that a person that had gone to prison at some point was brought or was served a contempt for court, didn't show up for court, and a bench warrant was issued. It's a civil arrest warrant. It's called the capias. What our agency did statewide was we had a program where we had offices select a group of 100 cases, and we asked them to provide information relative to those 100 cases. We said, see if they have a Department of Correction number. See if they have a Department of Motor Vehicles license number. And then we would secure the picture of the person and then provide it to a state marshal or to the capias unit. And what we found was when those lists came back to us, if there were 100 names on that list, 75 to 80% of those people went to prison. 75 to 80% of the people on our arrest list had already been to prison for a criminal offense. In 2006, we started receiving information from the Department of Corrections on a weekly basis that provided us the currently incarcerated inmates. So, in effect, the 19,000 inmates that are presently in a Connecticut correctional facility. And we used that information to match it up against some of our outstanding warrants. In addition, in 2007, we said, and DOC was kind enough to provide us this information, is they gave us their whole database of information. All of their inmates and former inmates. And then we were able to match that up against our caseload. There were 290,000 records that Department of Corrections provided. We matched that up to our 140,000 cases. And although we have 140,000 cases, the group is split between people who have minor children and people who don't. It's about half and half. And 40% of our caseload, good payer, bad payer, 40% of our caseload had a person who went to a Connecticut correctional facility. Here are the exact numbers in the breakdown. 4% actually went to jail because of us, the child support program. 36% went on a criminal offense. And 60%, that's 60%. And I want to point out that all the information that we have, if you have a chance to look through, we have a copy of the report that you can pick up. All the information we have is just Connecticut Department of Corrections. It doesn't include federal prison, and it doesn't include other correctional facilities outside of Connecticut. So there could be more within that group of 60. And my guess is some of the non-payers in that group of 60% who don't show up in Connecticut Department of Corrections probably show up in Department of Corrections for New Jersey or Puerto Rico or Florida, some of our bigger states that we deal with. We look at everything in this tunnel. What does a person owe on a weekly basis? This is a distribution of what's owed on a weekly basis. That red line represents the poverty line, as calculated at about $16,000 in gross annual earnings. If you add up those numbers on the left, the 3 bars, you're looking at 65% of the former inmate or present inmate population is below the poverty line from the calculations that we made for court to determine their court order, meaning that their earnings are less than $16,000 a year. In effect, a minimum wage earner. And you'll see there's not a significant difference between someone who went to jail and someone who didn't in their average order. $70 a week on someone who went to prison, $87 a week on someone who didn't. And as I said before, we started this in an egocentric way, looking at collection rates. And the thing that stood out to me looking at this information was this, is that the collection rate, if you look at it, it is total collected and distributed to the custodial parent or the state of Connecticut divided by the total amount due. It's that simple of a calculation. And look at the difference between the two populations paying. 36% of the orders get paid for former inmates. 68% of the orders get paid for non-former inmates. And we have an overall state collection rate of 55%. That puts us 37th out of 54 states and territories. And I just, as a side note, part of that is reentry policies and child support policies in those different states that impact the relative rankings of the states. There's another thing within the collection rate that also stood out, is that I started noticing this pattern. It's always about patterns. You know, what do you see? Well, the people that are lower income obligors, those people that are minimum wage earners, they pay less of their order than the people who aren't. So not only do you have a problem when you have a former inmate that owes child support, add to that, make them a low income obligor, and they're the worst payers amongst our caseload, at least. They pay only 1/3 of their orders. That, in effect, means 68% of the people don't get child support if they had the father of their child in prison. And it was strange because, I go in everything with a theory. Sometimes bad, sometimes good. This time bad. I went in and I thought that I knew what was going on. And you hear things from people who have lived the experience that are captured in these numbers. But I thought that what I would see is a bunch of people that had a child support order, let's say $100, $150 a week. And that $100 and $150 a week, they went to prison. And we all know what happens when someone goes to prison. Let's be real. When a person gets out of prison, they have a tough time getting a job when they get out, at least above board. And so what you would think is that maybe that person would make some payments, partial payments, pay a little bit of their order, that $100, $150 order. That was not the case one bit. The orders were, on the whole, as you can see, everything in the middle, those partial payers are the middle bars. They're the smallest bars on this chart. It's the people who don't pay anything and the people who pay most of their order. And when it started to click to me, and it sounds silly, it sounds stupid to say it in public in front of all these people, but employment is a huge thing in reentry. It's a huge thing for child support, and it ensures that we get money to the family. And this shows how dramatic the population of, and you can even ignore the never incarcerated. Just look at the blue bar. 51% of the people that went to jail during the review period that we looked at paid nothing. That's out of 26,000 former inmates. 51% paid nothing. And we started looking at what are the contributing factors. It's not just a job. I mean, because before you can get a job, you have other issues. There are other issues to deal with. And when we looked at it, part of the DOC file that came over to us explained to us kind of what the nature of the crimes were. And as everyone would expect, drug or alcohol is just like the Connecticut Department of Corrections profile today. It's the same in our profile. Drug or alcohol offenses are the most common amongst our caseload for criminal offenses. And then I would guess, and being a novice at this, violation of probation and failure to appear, there's probably a lot of them with underlying drug or alcohol-related offenses also. And if you notice, we took this information from the Department of Corrections' own numbers. Reconviction rates on those are alarmingly high. And if, as a child support agency, we're expecting to get money when we know that there's almost a 40% chance of that person going back to jail within 1 year, we know we're not going to get money. We know the system is broken for this group of people. We looked at recidivism within our caseload, and this is in the context of just our cases. Almost 3/4 of the people recommitted a criminal offense. And you'll notice the number, 4 times. We can't collect money from that person. That person's in and out of the system. And I'm not going to go into this because you guys are way more experts at this, but end of sentence, supervised release, 2/3 leave end of sentence, which in all likelihood means that they're not supervised, and some of the services that might be necessary are not afforded or are not taken advantage of. And so it's just the reality of what we see. These are just a list of what we consider some of the barriers to successful reentry beyond our own actions. Poorly educated, no skills. And there's a large number of people that don't have formal education beyond high school or even have completed high school. And that is a factor that I'll show you in 1 second, what we found on that. Substance abuse issues. You want to have a strike, you're going out to get a job, and you have a substance abuse issue. And you in all likelihood, been to jail several times and will recommit within a year. We know we are not going to get money from that person. And of course, the felony stigma that we all heard here is that checking off that box. I promised someone from the Male Involvement Network that I would say this, is employers, the Department of Commerce, have a huge role in successful reentry. Employment. We had a person speak to our agency who ran numbers specifically for us from Connecticut Department of Economic Growth and Development. And this is alarming because it's alarming in the context of former inmates. Is that 60% of the occupations with the largest growth rates in this state, this is Connecticut, will require a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. And the other 40% will require some sort of technical training. Now, you look at some of these lists, and they don't typically seem like, and I want to use this term, white-collar jobs. They're not. It's just that the old blue-collar jobs, as explained by the Department of Economic Growth and Development, the old blue-collar jobs require computer skills now. They're not the same jobs that they were. And the two groups don't mix. They don't match up anymore. We have the benefit of taking, when we take the information from our child support system, of telling us what creates the largest sources of income for these particular caseloads. And you'll notice the one with Connecticut inmate numbers on the left, look at the top one, unemployment compensation, Social Security Administration, so they're receiving benefits. They're self-employed. There's another one with pretty obvious that you're going to have a lot of self-employed people. The state controller, Yale University, Walmart, Labor Ready. The interesting thing about the employers that are on this list that I found a little surprising is that if there was Walmart for a person that didn't have an inmate number and Walmart for a person who did have an inmate number, they earned almost the same amount of money and they paid the same amount of money. So the key was that they were employed, that Walmart employed them. And a couple of the other ones. What we have been doing as an organization is we split these things up by region. And as you can expect, the worst 3 places in the state are Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford. Not a shock. And we broke those up just to give some guidance to our staff. We're in the process of trying to determine, are there places that we can direct people? Are there particular employers that will hire former inmates? And this gives them a little template. We tried to develop a profile just of the average former or presently incarcerated inmate, and here's what it is. The average weekly current support order that we're trying to enforce is $70 a week. Their average balance is $17,300. This was startling. Top 100 balances owed in the state of Connecticut, 58 of them are former inmates, and their balance exceeds $125,000 a year. And their pay orders in general on old balances are $5 and $10 a week. Figure the math on that one when $125,000 is going to get paid off at $5 or $10 a week. There were 51% didn't pay during our review period. The average age of the people in our caseload is 37 years old. So we're not talking about a significant number of young people. And as you notice, we only had 24 people under the age of 21. The recidivism rate, 74%. Average number of times incarcerated, 4. Average number of minor children per inmate is 2. The percentage of cases from Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven is 61% that are former inmates. The distribution of our cases, if you just take our caseload, is those 3 offices represent 50% of the caseload, yet they represent 61% of the inmate population in our caseload. And this is what I alluded to earlier, is the percentage of caseload with an active TFA, which is public assistance, is 12%. The average caseload has 6%, so it's twice as much amongst the former inmates. And the most common crime committed was drug or alcohol-related offenses. We try to sit down and develop some reentry goals from our agency's perspective. And having the group that we have here, because it represents a large cross-section of the people who can affect these goals, we thought it would be good to bring them up in front of everyone here. And so the first one is, we're able to contribute to successful reentry through constructive enforcement and modification policy. We can, and we do, offer modification services to inmates that are currently incarcerated. We've actually started some targeted programs where we send information to the Department of Correction facility that the person's at that says, if you would like to start the modification process, sign this piece of paper and send it back to us, and we will initiate the process on your behalf. And what the court will do is the court will bring that matter in, and in the cases that we looked at so far, a majority of the cases are reduced to 0 during the term of incarceration. We can also, because we know the group of people that it involves now, we can also do other targeted outreach to the group in general, outside of the people that are currently in prison. We have that in our power. We have the power, as I mentioned earlier, that in a contempt action, do we contempt that person or don't we contempt that person? It's a discretionary thing. Some of our stuff isn't. And I know that we've talked to several of the groups, and I'll give you an example of one that is not a discretionary one, is the federal government requires us to seize bank accounts in certain circumstances if balances meet certain thresholds. Well, some programs have incentives for former inmates to save money. And then they match that money. And then we seize the account. Right? You can see that we have clashing problems that we have to address, but that is one of them. But when it comes to a contempt action, right now we issued an interim policy that tells our staff we don't want you to initiate a contempt-based action, or if there's an outstanding arrest warrant, to initiate that within 90 days of the person's release. In the past, we would have done it right away. We're trying to determine what the appropriate time frame is, and we're meeting with people here to find out what is an appropriate time frame. We want to try to identify common objectives, because I think that some of the research we have, and there's always conflicting research, but some of the research that we have shows that if a person's employed, they're less likely to commit a crime again. They're less likely to go back to their addictive behaviors. Well, they're more likely to pay their child support, too, if they get a job. So there is some common elements that people in this room, that we can work together on. And I know that in the past, we've seen studies, and the people that we've met with have seen studies, that the relationship between the parents and the children are huge in whether a person pays child support or not. Other states have done studies on this, and they show that if there's a relationship between the parent and the child, they're way more likely to pay. And we know that employment, and some of the speakers up there echoed the sentiment, is that meaningful employment, not just minimum wage, meaningful employment, we know that if that person secures meaningful employment, that they'll probably stay at that meaningful employment, they'll probably stay there, and we'll probably be able to attach the wages, and the child will get money. And ultimately, what that leads to is that 12% of people on the former inmates, that where their children are on public assistance, maybe, just maybe, that the actions of that person gaining meaningful employment and us passing the money through to the children will allow them to come off of public assistance. And their children don't have to be in that same cycle. And I don't know if, Andrew, do we have time for any questions? No? That's okay. Well, I just want to point out that there's a table of support enforcement people over there. Sharice Hutton's the director. Sharice has her hand up. John Lucas is with the white shirt and the blue tie. And Dahlia Pankey is the deputy director in our agency. And any of us will be happy to field questions about our process. I have contact information that's in this presentation. We have a copy of our more formal written report that's available that we can give you a copy of. It's actually right over here. We'll leave it in the back, and we look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. I hope people found that informative, and certainly we'd love to have questions and answers, but we're going to try to move this along, and if there's a opportunity for us to facilitate any conversations between support enforcement and anyone here or anyone watching this at CTN, we'd love to be able to do that. And I also want to thank CTN for covering this. There was an individual that mentioned earlier that the community isn't here, but we certainly do invite them to participate in these programs, and I think by having CTN here, they bring it out to the community as well. This doesn't have to be a one-day conversation, and in fact, it shouldn't be a one-day conversation. So we love that CTN is able to cover these larger, more meaningful conversations about the particular issues that we're addressing today. I'd like to now introduce and thank two other people that have been extremely important in putting this program on today. Aileen Keyes, who you met earlier, she introduced the first panel, and up next is Lindsay Ruffalo, who is going to introduce this next panel. She and Aileen are research specialists at the Institute, and Lindsay actually worked with us at the second Building Bridges Conference. That's where we met Lindsay. She was a CCSU student in the Criminology and Criminal Justice program, and has really blossomed under now working as a research specialist, and we're really happy to have her. She's an extremely smart, capable person, and one of those people that we talk about when we're saying CCSU graduates, they come back to Connecticut, they stay in Connecticut, and they help participate in the workforce and in public policy in the future, and she's doing a great job with that. And she's now getting her master's degree here at Central, and she'll introduce the next panel.